Access and Power Apps, mainly about Power Apps, but yeah, Access has a quite big share in this presentation too. So, my name is Karl Donaubauer, etc., etc. I'm the guy on the left side, by the way, and I'm not the biggest expert in the world for Power Apps. I would say currently I'm at a good intermediate level as a Power Apps developer. The advantage of having me here today as a presenter is that I, of course, have the access and database view. Otherwise, if you speak to Power Apps, Power Platform people, they're coming from completely different backgrounds, like Dynamics or SharePoint or whatever. And they don't understand what you're talking about when it comes to data. Often the data is quite dismissed in the Power Apps, and only the surface counts. So, what will I show you today? I will quickly introduce Power Apps for the people who don't have a clue what it's about or haven't heard much about it. I will go deeper into licensing because this always is a problematic part. What does it cost? How do I get it? Microsoft does here a very complicated job. There's a 40 pages PDF to explain it, and I will try to explain it in, well, 2 or 3 slides. And then it will be about, I will talk about some data sources for Power Apps and about hybrid apps. That's what I mean here is there is an Access frontend, the Power Apps frontend, and they share a common data source like SharePoint, Dataverse, SQL, whatever. And the focus will be in my presentation today, how you start with Power Apps, how you do the first, second, third app, what's the way you want to go there. And normally I have about 80 slides or so and 200 bullet points. And this time I restricted myself to under 20 slides and not a single bullet point. Who finds a bullet point in my presentation can send me an email and shout at me. So I will show you primarily my personal journey. All these techniques, the backends, the hybrid apps, I will show it in demo. That's my goal today. If you want to have a more detailed technical description, 100 links or so, there's a little link below the bubble here to a session I gave a few months ago for the lunchtime access user group in America, for Maria Barnes group, and there you can find everything. You will get the slides, by the way, of course, after the conference. So also you can click there, but today I will focus on demos. And after that, I will go briefly over the latest news on Power Apps, the things I find important, because you have 100 news every week concerning Power Apps. It's incredible. But I filtered something out that is interesting for us as database people. And the last point is a classical point, I would say, in the meantime, in every presentation that I do about Power Apps is the relationship between Access and Power Apps. Is it a versus? Is it a plus? Or what is it? As a food for thought for everyone here as Access developer. So, what is Power Apps? Power Apps was published in 2016, so it's about 5 years old. It's primarily a development environment for mobile apps. You can use the apps on your cell phone or on a tablet. It can be Apple, it can be Android, it can be Windows, of course. You can use it in the web browser, and in this sense it's also a kind of a platform, because if you use it in the web browser, you get all the things you need for this from Power Apps too. Otherwise, on your mobile, it is an app, of course. It is a no-code or low-code development environment. That means it is targeted to the so-called citizen developers. That's not only Microsoft that's who's calling them like this, but a lot of big companies today. It's a kind of, well, the power user from former times in a modern way. People who don't have necessarily a developer background, but want to do something for their company or for their private life with this Power Apps. This is the starting screen when you do a new Power App, and there are essentially 3 types of apps that you can do with Power Apps. The first one is Canvas apps. That's what I will focus on today and what I will show all my examples from. The other 2 are model-driven apps. That's data-driven apps. So your data decides about what you will see in terms of automatically creating forms, etc. You can do huge applications with model-driven apps. And in fact, there are a lot of huge applications out there, because this is what the people do when they use Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics, the ERP system from Microsoft. This is where the model-driven apps come from. And the third and youngest member in the family are portals. These are web pages, also driven by Dataverse, and they enable anonymous access, but they are, well, I would say still in the beta phase. So today I will completely focus on Canvas apps. Power Apps is part of the Power Platform. There are the 4 parts: Power BI for analytics, Power Apps for app development, Power Automate, well, the name says it, process automation, and the Power Virtual Agents to do discussion bots. And the data comes from 3 main sources. That's beneath that. There are a lot, about 400 data connectors for SQL, for Dataverse. No, not for Dataverse, it has its own part here, but for SQL or Oracle or you name it. And you can use artificial intelligence services from Microsoft. You usually have to pay for them, but they are very mighty tools. And the native backend of Power Apps and of all the Power Platform is Dataverse. Maybe I will show you 2 or 3 minutes about Dataverse. You've never seen such a quick demonstration of Dataverse. A big issue is the licensing. It's quite complicated, and try to put it down to very few things, the essential things. So if you want to use Power Apps, the first question would be, do you have a Microsoft 365 plan that includes Power Apps? These are all the Microsoft 365 plans that currently include Power Apps. So there's a lot out, not only the bigger plans, the E plans up above, but also, for example, Business Basic. This is what I will show you in my demos. I only use Business Basic today. That's about $5 per month, or €4.20 for Europe. And another popular plan is Business Standard. It's the same as Business Basic, but with all the Office apps, including Access, downloadable and installable on your desktop. So very popular plans. And down below you see all the students and faculty, university, blah, blah plans. That's because Microsoft, of course, wants to bring people to the Power Platform, especially the young students, the young people. So if you don't have a plan that includes Power Apps, buy it. Buy a Microsoft 365 plan, because this is the cheapest and best way to get the full version of Power Apps. If you have a plan, then the next question would be, do you want to use premium connectors? Premium connectors are connectors for the big database systems, for example, for SQL, Oracle, etc., etc. There are about 200 premium connectors in the moment. And if you want to use one of these premium connectors, also Dataverse, the full version of Dataverse, then there are 2 ways again. If you don't want to use them, you can stay at the standard connectors. Standard connectors are SharePoint, Excel, etc. And if you are, if this is sufficient for you, you are good to go with your M365 plans. You're in the green zone here. You don't have to pay anything extra. You can use Power Apps for €4.20 or $5 a month. If instead you want to use premium connectors, you have to buy a real Power Apps license. And there are 2 flavors of this license. There is a per app license that costs $10 a month or €8.40. And you can have 2 apps with this app license, or there is a per user license. So for 1 user, 1 month, all he can eat, as much apps as he wants to use. And this costs $40 or €33. So this is essentially all you have to know about licensing. Of course, there are sources like the licensing guide here, who has a 40 pages of PDF about all this. Maybe in the next version, they will include my slide here. I don't know. And there's also a pricing website, of course, where you can see the plans and buy them. So I talked about the different kinds of connectors according to the licensing. There is standard connectors, there is premium connectors. The standard connectors are included in your M365 license if you have Power Apps, and There are popular ones, especially SharePoint, because most of my examples today will be about SharePoint, but also Excel, OneDrive, etc., etc. About 200 on this side, and about 200 on the other side. On the premium connector side, Dataverse, SQL, etc. Down below, I hope you still can see it. There is the on-premise data gateway in parentheses. This means that you can share local data, your local SQL server, for example, into a backend, into a Power App in the web. And in order to access your local data, you need this data gateway. And this is also on the premium connector side. This means you have to have a per app or per user plan. Then you can also access your local data with a Power App. There are also free ways to get a license for Power Apps. One is to use Dataverse for Teams. You get, if you have Teams, you get included a Power Apps version and a Dataverse version, a reduced version of both. It's a bit clunky to use, etc., but it's okay. You can do some work with it, create real apps. The main restriction is that it is bound to Microsoft Teams. So you can only use it in the Teams client or in the mobile client of Teams, but only inside of Teams. There are two other ways. There's a trial license, of course, like every time you use Office 365 or M365 for the 30 days. And the more interesting thing is the community plan. It's a free developer environment and license for single use, and it is not shareable. So you can build everything there, but you can't share it with other people. Like it's normal for developer environments. There are also some size limits, but that's not so important. The important thing is you can use everything, all the premium connectors, SQL, Dataverse, etc. I will show you in a few minutes how this looks like. Well, and the focus today is, as I said, my personal journey with Power Apps. I will show you.
May I just interrupt you? There have been a couple of questions regarding licensing, and I think it might be a good idea to address them now. Sure. It seems to be unclear who needs a license. Does only the developer need a license, or does each user working with the finished Power App also need a license? And is that covered in the $10 licensing fee or not? And can you clarify this, please?
Yeah, everybody needs a license, not only the developer, but everyone who uses the Power App. In short. You have to have a Power App license in order to use it anywhere, on your phone, in the web, wherever. But it's enough if they have a Microsoft 365 plan that includes Power Apps.
And that also means the premium connectors need to, all users that use a premium connector need to have the full license for that connector.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think that answered all the questions regarding licensing. Thank you.
Okay. So let me start with my personal journey there. I will show you, I think, 3 or 4 apps. Yeah, I should have the time. How you evolve when you start and then do your first apps, and then a few months later it will look like this and this. This is the focus for me today. The first one is how I've learned it. You know, there are 2 kinds of people out there in the world. My wife is one kind. She pushes every button on every machine and waits and looks if something happens and works. That's the one kind of people. And I am the other kind of people. Before I push the first button, I read about 100 pages of instruction. And then I push the first one and look if it works. And that's the same thing that I did with Power Apps. I did a lot of LinkedIn courses, everything that was available, 7, 8, 9 LinkedIn courses. I read a lot of documentation, the very good Microsoft documentation. That's the first link here, and other learning resources. I was in the Power Apps community. I'm still, if I have a question, every question you can think of is answered there in a positive or negative answer, but answered. And the biggest thing, the most important thing is Rory Neary's Microsoft Microsoft Canvas Power Apps from Hero to Zero course. It's a free course with more than 240 videos, more than 40 hours of content. And I was the first one who got the certificate there because you have to be crazy to do it. But it's really all the basics about all controls, about all the screens and the properties, etc. So if you really want to deeply learn Power Apps, go for this course. You get the link after the conference. And it's free, it costs nothing. So Rory did a great job there. And what I do today and every day almost is I watch YouTube videos of the Power Platform MVPs, of the real experts. I named the 3 I constantly watch. There are some more, of course, but these are really good people, and there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of videos out there. And this is the way you usually learn Power Apps, because books are always behind the time. There are so many innovations, and that's why you always learn from the videos. And now let me demo some of the applications. So I go to my desktop and to my browser, and this is my Business Basic plan. So this is Power Apps inside of my $5, €4 Business Basic plan. And I have some test apps here, and I also use it as environment for the development before I bring it over to my customers, to my clients. And yeah, let's just start with a new app. You probably have seen this, but today I want to talk more about the structure of such a new app that is created by the wizard. So let me do a new Canvas app. And the first question is, what's the data you want to start with? And I'm gonna go in for SharePoint and phone layout. And now it searches for all the SharePoint connections in my tenant, and there are a few, as you see, and I take this one and just take this list of suppliers. It's a SharePoint list. And I have to connect. And then the wizard starts, and the wizard creates me the usual 3-screen app that you always get when you begin with a new Power App. It needs 20 seconds or so, and then it has created a new app. Usually it needs 20 seconds. Yeah, I see it coming. Yep. So what you get is a 3-screen app. What do you get here? You get a browser screen, that's this one. You get a detailed screen, we will see in a second, and you get the edit screen. It's always the same structure here. So this is how you start with Power Apps in general. And let me do a quick test here. Of course, this is a wizard created. That doesn't really work. Can you mute the people, please, Phil, Peter?
Achso, den Zettel könntest du mir gleich abgeben.
Please mute them, otherwise people can't hear me. So what you see here is the ID. Normally you don't use the ID in your records. Yeah, there are some problems here. If I want to search, let me search for this Tilburg. It will not work because it searches the wrong field. So there are some problems in a new wizard created app, but it's usable. I can click on this. I see the detailed data, and that's the detail screen, and I can change it. Hopefully it works. Let's have some changes here. Yes, it has worked. So it's workable. Also, it doesn't look very pretty. I mean, I wouldn't present this to a client, but it can help you to start in your first app. So we've got the 3-screen app here. And that's essentially what I wanted to show you. I will show you the data source again. It's a SharePoint list in my tenant. So this is how you usually start. And then I will show you how you evolve in your next app and your next step, etc. That's the plan here. So let me close this one without saving. And generally you are working in an environment here. And up there on the right side, you see I'm working in my default environment. If I click on it, up come 2 environments. That's just a bug. It should be just one, because this is the community plan. The free community plan shows up in your Microsoft tenant, in your Microsoft 365 tenant, and it's equal on which I click. They are both the same. And I clicked on it, and now I'm in my free community plan, and there are different apps, different connections. Everything is different here. So it depends on your environment. This is also the way how you can handle it in your company. You have an environment where you do the development, and then you bring them over to the real production environment. Because you can copy over your app and you can copy over the data, etc., or you have the connection in the same tenant. Well, there are several examples here. I want to show you very briefly AdventureWorks. That's a SQL connection, SQL Azure. I think everybody knows AdventureWorks. And the second one is a Dataverse sample. And we'll go, I would say, first for the Dataverse sample. If I choose the Dataverse sample here, this is different than all the other things because Dataverse is the native backend. You see this, for example, here on the left side. If you click on the tables, normally you see nothing. In the SharePoint or SQL thing, you don't see nothing. Here you see the first Dataverse tables. And if I go to show me all, you see that I get a lot for free here. About, I don't know, 80, 90 tables. And if I go back to my custom tables, that show the one that I created and a few others. I go to for the table companies here. That's one that I created. This is Dataverse. And what you get here is much more than with the usual data source in a Power App, because there was the question before in the other session, what's the use of Dataverse? Well, you get a lot of things included with Dataverse. That's, you can define relationships here. You can define business rules. You can define views, forms, dashboards, blah, blah, blah. Although most of these things are not of much use for Canvas apps. Most of the things here are for model-driven apps, because all the things here come from the Dynamics background. Even if you click on some of the things like the forms here, you are sent over to a Dynamics URL. But of course, we can use columns, relationships, also business rules and views for our Canvas apps. The other things are more for the model-driven apps. That's where Dataverse comes from. That should be enough just to show you that Dataverse really is different. You get much more, but you have to pay it if you want to have the full version of Dataverse. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to show you in this environment, in the test environment, because I can use it without having to pay anything. I can do all my tests with the premium connectors. Let me show you the AdventureWorks example with the SQL Azure connection. It's the same, that's almost the same to handle like the SharePoint example I showed you before. It will open up one of these three screen apps, I think. If it opens up, it takes a few seconds because it has to establish the connection to the Azure, to my Azure account. We have time. Okay, and what you see here on the left side is again the three-screen app. You see the browse screen, the detail screen, the edit screen. And this one is just for testing. So you see essentially the same. It doesn't matter if you use Dataverse or SharePoint or SQL Server. There are differences. There are differences in how to handle the data concerning some functions. Because if you go to the settings of a Power App, I go to the settings and to the advanced settings. There is one important point about delegation. That means who does the work? Does your Power App, the client, the work of bringing over the data, filtering the data, sorting the data, or does it the server? And that, of course, is a big difference for the application. And usually the limit here is 500 records. So 500 records are pulled over to your Power App and processed locally. And you can alter this up to 2000 records, and that's it. And all the rest of the stuff, all the work has to be done by your server. And so you have to take care of which function can you use here so that the server does all the work and only sends you a few hundred records back. This is a thing that's different for the different backends. So with SharePoint, you have to handle the delegation like this, with SQL like this, and with Dataverse like this. They're a bit different, but there is a good documentation out. So this is the usual thing with Now let me show you the data source. Oops. So this is really a SQL server. You see it here, and it's a premium connector. It's the diamond here says normally I would have to pay for this, but as I'm in my development environment here, if I go like this, it says, well, buy per user or per app plan if you want to really share this app. But for the development, it's free. I can use it with my community account. That's a very brief introduction to how to use a SQL Server here, SQL Azure. It's not very different from using SharePoint or any other backend. So let me switch back here. We close it, leave it. Okay, we're done. And I go back to my standard environment because I want to show you more examples like this. Real world examples I do for my clients. Because my first real application was for a charity. That's an Austrian charity that supports Indian street children. They feed more than 1,000 children there. They give them a home, they give them education, and I do the database part there. And I open it up. It's to manage all the donors and all the children. Of course, I obfuscated the data completely, but it's the real news. And this is a hybrid app. I can show you until it loads. I show you the Windows client, the Access client. You see, these are all SharePoint lists here. These are just some local lookup tables, but all the data is in SharePoint. It's the same data that I use in the Power App up there. And if I click on one of these, just to show you that this is a rich client with a lot of fields in it. This is the rich client in Access that uses the same data than the light client up there in the cloud with Power Apps. And you see dozens of fields here because it's quite complicated to manage all the spenders and all the children. More than 1,000 donors, more than 1,000 children, etc. Just to show you that this is a real hybrid app. This goes to the same SharePoint data than this one here. The app, and let me start it quick and show you what it does. So let's start with the donors, and let's start with this one here. It goes to the details, and down below here you see that it's kind of a subform that shows which children does the donor support here. Maybe I have another example from the other side. If we go in with the children, and I think this one has more than one donor. Yes, because this is an M-to-N relationship between the two tables, between the children and the donors. One child can have multiple donors because one pays for the bed, one pays for the education, one pays for feeding, etc. So this girl here, yes, it's a girl, has 3 donors, and the other way around is also possible. One donor can pay for several children, of course. So what I do here is a kind of main form and subform as we would do it in Access. So this is possible without any problem also in Power Apps. And I can switch to the children here and see that this has 2 donors, for example. So this is something we know from the Access world. Of course, it is done completely different here with other controls, etc. But you can do it. And what I want to show you is again the structure, because it's a bit different from what you know from the auto-generated wizard structure. And if I go here, you see essentially it's the same, but 2 times. I have the browse screen for children, the detail screen for children, and the edit screen. And the same for the donors, browse, detail, edit. So it's a more complicated version of what you get by the wizard. That's what you do in your second, in your third, maybe in your 4th app when you start with Power Apps. But it's a lot more complicated in detail, of course, than I show here with a lot of formulas, etc. Because when you go have a look at the right side or above here, you see a lot of properties. Everything here has properties. You have screens. On the screens, you have forms or controls like this gallery, for example, and inside this container controls, you have the single text fields or buttons or whatever. So it's a more complicated structure a bit than in Access because you have the screens, not only forms. Forms are on the screens here, and you have a lot of properties for all these things here, for all these elements. hundreds of properties sometimes, and you have the formula bar up there where you put in your formula. This is the programming language. Let me take, yeah. How does the data come into this gallery, for example? That's what I programmed for it. So I can unformat the text here, or can let it format. This is essentially your development, your VBA editor in Power Apps, where you put your formulas in. But of course, it's a declarative language, not an imperative language. Declarative means you essentially say what you want it to do and not how you do it. In an imperative language, you do all your algorithms and all the ways yourself, and in a declarative language like this, you say, I want this, I want it to sort, I want it to filter, I want it to filter in this field here and do this sorting here. This is the way you program with low code in a Power App. So this was another app, an app I did, the first real app I did for a client. Let me close it again. And yeah, I think we're done with this. And let me quickly change to my slides again. This was a hybrid app, as I said. Why shall we do hybrid apps? Why do I see a big market in this? Where we have two frontends, an Access frontend and the Power App frontend. Well, there are millions of Access applications out there. We know this. We are well known as developers in this environment, in this ecosystems. There's a huge client base, and I think the desktop will stay for many years to come. We don't know how many years, but the desktop with Windows and Excel and Access, etc., will stay, and at least in the moment, there's a strong base. So Access will not go away from a market perspective in the next years. And not every application is suitable for the online world. Think on the form factors. If you have a huge accounting system in Access, an inventory management, complicated workflows, this is not something you would like to do on your mobile. This is something that needs a big desktop, a big monitor. So not everything can be done in an app. Also, when you think on privacy, the GDPR in Europe, not every company does want to send its data up there in the cloud and to the NSA. So that's a problem for them. And they want to keep it private into their system local. And the biggest point I see for Access is tailor-made. There is no other tool out there that can be that quick and that cheap to do and produce perfectly tailor-made solutions for many problems. And that's the big point for Access, because I mean there are products out there in the cloud like SAP, Dynamics, whatever, that can do all these things, that can do heavy clients. But they are much more, you have to pay much more time and money for this. So Access has its place, and especially because the solutions are so tailor-made. On the other side, there is almost always a need to do something mobile, part of your application. The client wants to have the data of his clients out there when he's on the go, when he's at the client side, when he's in his car, when he has only his mobile device with him, his cell phone. So that's the part where Power Apps comes into play, in my point of view. And this is not only talk, but this is what I do on a daily basis since I'm involved with Power Apps too. I don't have enough time to feed all my clients with what they want. It's a huge market, and yeah, I have done several weeks of work, paid work, in connection with these hybrid apps. So if we want to provide such a mobile solution with Access, we know it's difficult to provide and to install it. We can do remote desktop, remote apps, etc., but they have problems and disadvantages, and they lack a lot of modern functionality and connectors. On the other side, Power Apps is a really good RAD environment where you do a new application in days, or if it's sophisticated, maybe weeks, but you don't usually need months to do an application for the web or for the mobile client. And the learning curve isn't steep. So for an Access developer, it's easy to learn. I needed, well, let's say 2 or 3 months to produce my first real app of learning. Microsoft was really late in this market, in my point of view, and they were slow. So Power Apps are 5 years old, and in my point of view, you can forget the first 2 or 3 years. But now Microsoft does already own a big market share. They are on the fast lane. Every day they gain a bit of this market, and there are already millions of people out there, I think, that use Power Apps, and many thousand people who create apps with Power Apps. It's a huge community in the meantime. And on the Power Apps and Power Platform side, you get everything you don't have in Access. They have a budget at Microsoft. They have huge innovation potential. Every week you get 10 new things, and they have a vibrant community. Every day you can have 12 new videos from Power Apps, MVPs, etc. I want to show you a last app. This is a more advanced app on my journey. This is an app I'm currently building for a client. It's a producer of custom machinery over here near Vienna in Austria. It's a medium business, and it's about collecting data for business trips. Any kind of business trips. That can be a quick ride to get the Pasta Pizza, or it can be multiple days where they install custom machinery over the border in another country. So different kind of business trips. And so far they had an Access application. They still have it, of course. It's a big client, but some of the forms there were supposed to be edited with this business trip data, and it didn't work because they had to do it after the fact. They were on the journey, they came back, and they had to collect everything: their kilometers, their times, where did I do this and that, this address and that address. So it doesn't work like this. So we created a mobile application, and the goal is that they do live editing. Just do the editing there and have the data available. So I will do a quick demo on this one. There is a Windows client again. This is the Windows client, the older Access client, where you see it's a grown-up application of 15 years or so. And I said I do some consulting since 2-3 years. So I told them, why not use some SharePoint tables like this, some SharePoint lists, and handle this business write data, business trip data from a Power App, and then take it, and with this queries here, I take it over to the local heavy Access client. So let me switch again to my Power App, and this is the app I'm talking about, this travel client. I think I have, well, 2 or 3 minutes for it. Just give you an overview of what it looks like if you are further in your way with Power Apps, if you really want to start with it. They're getting things ready to establish the connection to SharePoint again, and then load the app. This is a hybrid app again, as I said. Rich Access client and a light Power Apps client that doesn't want to, okay, show. And from the structural point, it looks quite different. There is not this rescreen app. It has a start screen, it has an admin screen, it has a browse screen, and no edit screen, or the edit screen is included in this. It's a multi-page app where you can edit and view your data on different screens here. So you change the normal way as you do it in Access. You don't take what the wizard produces, but if you are more skilled, you change the way your data is handled. So let me do a quick, I first have to tell who I am here. This is normally saved on the device, in the app storage on your mobile device, but in this case, I'm using the browser, and there is no such cache here. And yeah, it's about travel cost, and here you have several records, and you can do 5 things here. You can add a new record. You can start with this trip data here. You can say the end point of this trip is the start point for the next one in terms of time and address, etc. You can throw it away. You can change it. You can have a look on it. So I'll start a new trip here. And you see here page 1 of 2. That means it has 2 pages. The last time I demonstrated it, it had 3 pages a few weeks ago. Then we reduced it to 2 pages because it's faster to fill in. And this is the first page. This is the second page with the car data, essentially. So let's do one record here. And if I change it to something that's not a write, not a travel thing, but an assembly, for example, externally at a local firm, it's only just one page and save directly. And if I change it to a write again, I get the other screen for the car data. And I say, well, it's connected with an order. I can do some note here. I can change the time, of course, if they need 1 hour or so, if they do breaks, if they stay overnight. And then there's other data here. I started, let's say, with this address, and I ended up with this guy here. I'm in their data, you see, it's real data. That's my real address. And I used this car for it, and I was driving myself, and I started with this kilometers, and I needed 20 more here. And maybe I crossed the border in this town and this time, or not, and then I save it. So that's quickly what you do over here, and it says, well, this was a big success up there, and you have your new record here. So this is how it works. But the main thing is here, you work more with graphics, you work with different screens, different forms, then you would start and you have a different structure here. So that's, we don't have more time, of course. I could talk hours and hours about all the development here. And it's currently going on. We are not even at 1.0, but we are still testing it. So let me go back to my slides for a last few things on it. Some news in the Power Apps world in the last weeks or months. The question that the language I showed you up there with the expression that does the data binding or what your button does, it's now called Power FX. So it's simply what you used in the last years in the Power Apps to program. It has a name now. It's Power FX, and the plan of Microsoft is to get it in every Power Platform application, so also in Power BI and the other parts of the Power Platform. They extend it. They introduced responsive containers. That's if you want responsiveness for your phone and your tablet. It's well, I wouldn't say easier, but it's integrated now. You can export all your things, all your source code to GitHub. That opens up source code control and, of course, find and replace capabilities. A late thing they have introduced is environment variables. This concerns application lifecycle management because it's always a problem to get your backend elsewhere, to change your backend path. And this becomes easier if the environment variables are accessible. They are still in the beta, but they are coming. And one of the last things they did is a print function, finally, because printing isn't very high in the level there if you are in a Power App. But now you can just say, print me this screen, and it opens up the printing capabilities of your browser, essentially. And the next thing that's announced is PDF export, printing into PDF also from mobile devices. I'm running out of time, so just my traditional last slide here, the relationship between Access and Power Apps. I see 2 points. It's competition and it's complementation. Competition means Power Apps gets all the young and novice devs, the citizen developers, because Access is nowhere to seen in a university, in a school, but Power Apps is, of course. There's the marketing, etc. Everybody who wants to do thin clients, who wants to do a mobile and tablet application first, will use Power Apps instead of maybe they have done their thin clients in former times, started with Access. Now they start with Power Apps. If they want to use one of the modern features, I just listed some of them here. On the other side, there's a big market, as I told you before, hybrid apps. I already talked about it. Now we use mainly SharePoint because it doesn't cost nothing than your Microsoft 365 license. And we can use SQL Azure, as I showed you. And the plan is, as Microsoft people showed us before, to establish in June a new database connector inside of Access. And for you as a developer, as a person, I see Power Apps as an extension, as a modernization of your RAD toolset. So I'm done. Are there any questions, Philip?
Oh yes, there are a couple of questions, and there are basically two major areas of questions. One is deployment and sharing, and I summarized the questions from Erwin, Brent, Ben, and Morgan. if you develop a Power app in one environment, in one tenant, is there an easy way to deploy this app to another tenant? And what can you do about versioning Power Apps and configuration management in that context?
Yeah, and the answer is always it depends. If you use Dataverse, that's again an advantage of Dataverse. You have the so-called Dataverse solution packages. And these solution packages include a lot of application lifecycle management, your backend, like this environment variables, and it's much easier to do this. In the applications I showed you, so these cheap things I do for my clients, I just copy over the Power App. Essentially, you can export it as a zip file. You can export it as an MS App file. So you have different ways to export it from your development environment and import it in your target environment. The other thing is the backend, the data. You essentially have to delete now. You have to delete all the tables. It was just 5 or 6 SharePoint lists in my examples here. I have to delete them and recreate them at the client side and reestablish the connection. But usually I need maybe 15 minutes or so to do so, because Access is a good way to deploy a SharePoint application, for example, a SharePoint backend, because you can say, I want to have this SharePoint table, this SharePoint list locally in my Access with a right click. You can have it in Access and then deploy it just to a different HTTP website, to a different SharePoint client. So the deployment with Access and SharePoint is quite easy. You do it in some minutes or maybe an hour if you have a lot of data. And it's quite similar with the other data. With SQL Azure, you just, you need, again, to delete all the tables and views you have linked in the Power Apps and re-link them in the target environment. That's essentially what you do. And it becomes easier with this environment variables, or if you have Dataverse in use. So it's a wide area. I just can't answer with a few sentences here because we're running out of time. Maybe 1 or 2 other questions, and the rest we can do in the feedback hour.
Okay, I'll summarize another area where multiple questions were asked by David, Harald, and Anders. Can you clarify if it is possible to use Microsoft Access databases as backends, or is it rather advisable to use SQL Server databases, or do you prefer SharePoint? Can you a bit differentiate between the 3 options?
Wow, I would need an hour. I tried in a minute. So what I do essentially is really that what I showed you. I have a lot of customers who have Access backends or even SQL Server backends now in their Access applications. And they want to have a part of their applications on the go, on their mobile. And that's why I use SharePoint. It's cheap, it's easy, it's integrated already into Access. I know all the pitfalls because there are pitfalls if you use SharePoint. You have to know what you are doing. But this is an easy way to create a light mobile part. So with SharePoint, if you have an existing SQL Azure application, it's very easy to add a Power App. As I showed in a brief example, it's easy to connect to the SQL server. So I wouldn't change that. Whereas Dataverse has other advantages. I couldn't name a lot of them, but it's the native backend. It's a bit quicker. It's a too complicated question for a minute. We have to do it in the feedback hour, I think. It depends on your starting point, essentially. What do you have already? What do you want to provide for your clients?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Karl. That were the most popular topics where questions were asked. So I think all the other questions can be addressed later in the feedback session. Yeah. So Karl, thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me in this beautiful conference. Bye. Let's take a break.